Welcome. It has just gone 7:10, Wednesday the 28th of July, and you are watching Regional Wrap. It's episode 17 of Regional Wrap, providing insight on the issues affecting regional Australia and giving a voice to regional residents. My name is Bill Bates. Joining me on this episode, print media. Is the news of its impending death in the regions merely a birth notice for a new local independent print formats? My guests tonight are Max Tomlinson, Carl Portella, and Scott Morrison. Max is the founder of MT Media and is a former executive News Limited. Carl is the managing director of Express newspaper in Mareeba, and Scott is the founder of the Burdekin local news. Welcome, gentlemen.
Hey, Bill.
Hey, Bill.
Good to be with you, Bill.
If I can start with you, Max, if you can just give us the audience a little bit of insight of your background.
Yeah, sure, Bill. I did my training at the Melbourne Herald back in the 60s. It was an afternoon newspaper, and I'm forever grateful for having that grounding. Got married in 1972, and saw a job advertised at the Townsville Bulletin for journos. So I got the job. I got a telegram, actually. You might remember that, you older listeners and viewers, to say I had the job, and we came up in 73. I was a journo at the Bulletin for 5 or 6 years, then became chief of staff and night editor. And then in 78, I went out to Charters Towers to run the Northern Miner. It was a tri-weekly back in those days.
Andrew.
And I was there till 1981, and then came back.
We're frozen. Max is frozen there, so we wait for him to come back. If I can just tick over to you, Carl.
You want to know a little bit about me, Matt?
Yes, thank you.
Bill? Not a problem. I'm not born and bred in the country. I was 4 years old when I came to. I'll let Max continue. By the way, let Max continue.
You just froze there for a minute, Max.
Oh, okay.
It's a good look too, Max. Look good.
Not sure where I was, but obviously frightened the camera. But from Charters Towers back to Townsville for a year, then up to Innisfail and Atherton, and ran the far northern papers for the North Queensland Newspaper Company. Then down to Bowen in 86, and in 1990 I took on the Ayr and Home Hill papers. So I was running Bowen, Ayr and Home Hill, which I really enjoyed. And then from there I was promoted to managing director of the Post Courier Group up in Papua New Guinea. News Limited's far-flung division up in that part of the world. I had 2 years there. It was a fantastic experience. And then I came back to Townsville, and I was North Queensland Newspaper Company chairman and managing director for 5 years. And then down to Adelaide for a couple of years as MD of the Adelaide Advertiser Sunday Mail Group. And at that time, I was a director of News Corporation, and I guess partly responsible in that role for what we're talking about here tonight, the demise of lots of newspapers. So I saw the best of the years in the newspaper game, and now I'm watching the demise of the once great publishing houses.
Thanks, Max. For your background, please, Carl.
Yeah, so I'm an immigrant. I came to Australia when I was 4 with my family and parents. But I have been here ever since. So lucky me. It's been a terrific journey, to be honest. I started off when I finished school. I went to boarding college at St Augustine's in Cairns, and moved into radio for about 15 years. And I worked at a lot of the local radio stations up here, and a little stint overseas as well. But then I moved into retail. I had a little hospitality industry or business in Cairns for about 7 or 8 years. And when I got tired of that, I saw a job vacancy at the Tablelands Advertiser based in Atherton as one of their sales reps. So I decided to apply for the position there. Barry Simpson was the editor at the time, and Barry took me on. He knew me personally as well, and I was there for about 9 years before Barry moved on, and actually I ended up becoming the manager of the paper as well, with an editor with me as well. And I was there for about 15 years all up with News Corp. So I got to know the business, the industry, and you know, how to run newspapers from that particular level. And when you're managing a community newspaper, especially for News Corp, you have to have your finger in the pie in everything that you do, from, you know, distribution to advertising, news, you know, printing, the work. So I had all that knowledge and so forth behind me, and I didn't quite like the direction that the company was taking. So I decided to start my own newspaper in 2010. We kicked off as the Mareeba Express, in direct competition and smack bang in the middle of News Corp. We had four News Corp newspapers around us. And it was difficult in those early days. We, you know, they tried very vigorously to close us down because they didn't like anyone else sort of encroaching onto their territory. But we managed to survive that. And well, we can't say we were the cause of it, but the advertiser did close down about 2 or 3 years ago. But then, of course, followed the other News Corp closures. And of course, that did wonders for us too. So that's given us a lot of more paging, obviously. So we've basically doubled in size, doubled our staffing as well. So yeah, things are looking up at the moment, and we're doing quite well.
Okay, over to you, Scott.
Okay. I'm the son of a RAF photographer who, which means we travelled a lot as a kid. I ended up going to art college and I did advertising design. I came out of there, I was lucky to be mates with the guys who are my lecturers, and I got involved in an agency in Brisbane, so I was a part in that. I left there, became a roadie. I toured around Australia with bands, ended up back in Townsville, which is where I was born. Ran to a guy I went to art college with. He said there's some guys in Townsville who'd love to meet you. Anyway, I ended up starting an advertising agency when I was 27 in Townsville. That sort of became, I reckon, about probably the second biggest agency in North Queensland. We were lucky to have very good clients and very big clients at that time. To be in the world of advertising was like a drug for me, because I lived and breathed it. It's all I ever did. My only interest was advertising. I did a lot of it. I did a lot of signage, a lot of logos, a lot of branding. Basically, I was lucky to have David Carmichael's car dealerships as my major client. So that was from client. We had Toyota in Cairns and Holden in Mackay and Ford in Townsville and Key Motors and so forth. And so I did that I still own that business. I still have an advertising agency. So it's now 35 years old, that agency. And about 15 years ago, my wife and I decided we'd like to do a magazine. So we knew nothing about magazines, but we thought we'd have a go. And so we started a magazine called Duo, which still exists, though it's in hibernation. And we printed 148 issues of that over 15 years. And that distributed from Mackay to Port Douglas and west to Mount Isa. We'd print 10,000 copies a month. It's generally about 120 to 160 page magazine. Pretty high end. I mean, people loved it, which is pretty surprising. And then we had put Duo into hibernation because of COVID. So we went on JobKeeper and we're sitting around twiddling our thumbs with nothing to do in Townsville. Lo and behold, my sister-in-law lived in Ayr. She said, come down, I'm going to Perth, come and look after the house. So we came down, we're looking after the house. News Limited closed 110 newspapers, including the one that Max had been involved in years and years ago, which was, this one was called the Burdekin Advocate. So we thought, well, we've got nothing else to do. Let's have a look at doing a newspaper. And so we've now been going for about a year. We're learning how to do, I keep telling people we learn on the job. I just told Carl before, I'm very happy that I've got my two mentors here tonight, both Carl and Max. And so, it's actually quite weird because, I've known Max for 20 years, I suppose, around that time. But when I thought I would go into a newspaper, I thought I'd phone up a guy who has an independent newspaper, and he was a guy in Mareeba. I thought I'll give this guy a call, and he might tell me something. And I happened to call Carl, of all people, and I went, this guy was just a font of knowledge and told me everything about him, what I should do and what I shouldn't do. Then it turns out he's the president of the Queensland Country Press Association. I thought, how lucky a phone call was that? So we've since been going for a year. We've learned a lot. We're very happy that people love the paper and they want to support it, and they thank us every day. We ran into somebody who says, thank you for doing the paper. And then now we're looking to get this model right, and then we can do that in some other locations as well. So we're looking at Charters Towers at the moment, and we'd like to look at others if the possibility comes up and it's, you know, it works out okay. But of course, we need support. We need the support of the town and the people and the advertisers as well. But we're finding it very exciting and very interesting. I've still got the two other businesses going, and I've got this one that I'm spending most of my time doing now, and yeah, learning a lot. It's looking very positive.
Okay, so thanks very much for that. And gentlemen, we'll move on to the topic, basically the closing of newsprint formats in regional, well, not just regional Queensland, regional Australia, I presume right across our land. I would expect most of you would have a bit of an overview of, say, going back 40 odd years, 50 years, insight in what goes on in the regions, and basically what we've seen over the years is a greater number of people populating the major capital cities. Also, through better mechanisation and automation, the labour forces within regional Queensland is sort of diminished, especially in agriculture, and that move away from regions in agricultural worker numbers would have started maybe 50 or 60 years ago, if not longer. And we've gradually seen, especially in the smaller towns like Julia Creek, Cloncurry, Croydon, Richmond and that, though the population of those regions has decreased dramatically over the years. And that's led to demise of services and also business opportunities in those areas. So it's basically everything's drawn back to the coast. But we now find even our coastal cities and our fairly sizable smaller regional cities are basically just, as far as the captains of industry, they don't see it as a sufficient market to put their energy in. So we've had the demise of the print newspaper, but then all of a sudden we've also had decisions not to actually distribute the last of the printed media beyond the Great Dividing Range. So it really is a great void out there, and with the void comes an opportunity, provided you can get into that niche. How do you see that, Max?
Well, sure, there's been a drift of people from those small communities into the larger centres. But I think the real issue is the march of technology. The two things you need to produce a newspaper, well, a major newspaper, is a press, multi-million-dollar investment, and secondly, a distribution system with a very heavy product. So to freight a newspaper, like in the old days, a courier mail to be sent to North Queensland would be in an aeroplane. Newsprint is very heavy. And I know from my experience when Lachlan Murdoch used to go to New York and thump the boardroom table and say, I need 600 million for new presses in Adelaide or Perth or wherever it might be. The New York-based directors looked at each other in surprise, but they were basically saying, what are newspapers? Do we own newspapers somewhere? I mean, this was the beginning of the end. Those guys in New York, we don't own, News Corporation, I should say, don't own very many newspapers in the US. It's basically the New York Post and the Wall Street Journal, which Murdoch has bought for political reasons and influence. So the New York directors don't see newspapers as being very much part of their pie chart. And if you look at the pie chart, newspapers are a tiny sliver in the pie chart of News Corp. So what's happened is the bean counters have got control of the Australian arm of News Corporation, which is the major centre for newspapers in the News Corp stable, and have said, you know, why do we own all these press sites? why are we printing newspapers when people are looking at news on their smartphones? Wouldn't it be easier if we just collated the news electronically and then pressed a button and sent it out to everybody? If we do that, we don't need a press. We don't need to freight this heavy commodity around the country. So I think, yes, it's a combination of the drift of people from the smaller and regional centres, and the loss of services such as banks and railways and police and emergency services. But coupled with that is this march towards technology. Now, I'll give you an example. The old lady in Julia Creek who goes down to the bank and puts $5 a week into her kid's bank account. And in the old days, she'd have a little bank book that would be stamped with a nice little stamp, and there would be, she'd be able to follow the interest and so on. Well, that's all gone. And do they care about that old lady in Julia Creek, the Westpac, the Commonwealth Bank? No way. Their share prices are going through the roof, and they're shutting down services in rural areas. News Limited have caught up, and unlike a lot of companies, News Limited are a hard-hearted company. They don't have a brief to service underprivileged areas. It's all about money. And once upon a time, you had a newspaper, you had editorial types and production types that had come up through the industry running the place. Nowadays, you've got bean counters who really sort of smile when you talk about keeping a newspaper. We looked at buying the Tully Times at one stage, and I put a proposal to News Limited. Nobody in Sydney ever looked at it. It sat on Lachlan Murdoch's desk, and every time I rang, it was basically patting me on the head and saying, "Look, Max, yeah, everything's fine. You know, you just relax. We'll get your medication right eventually." They just don't care, and that's sad to say, and I regret saying it. But the fact is, in this world of economic rationalisation, if it doesn't pay, they don't care about the consequences. It's all about the share price, and all about making money for those who run the company. It's a long-winded answer, but I think it's a combination of the points you raised, Bill, and the march of technology. Like, everyone's got these things. We're all guilty of communicating in an anonymous way, texts and emails. We don't ring. You know, my wife says to me, "Why don't you ring instead of texting?" And like most people have come to the conclusion that you don't want to talk about the weather for 5 minutes and then say, "Look, is that meeting still on tomorrow?" So we just text. So life's becoming impersonal. The old country newspaper is really, it's in the realm of the old lace-up boots, sadly. But thanks to you guys and others who are bubbling up all around the country out of the grassroots of these small communities, I'm so heartened to see it, and I support you fully.
Moving over to you, Carl. I mean, it's a bit of a downer in regards to what Mac's saying there, but with the demise of News Corp, you definitely see an opportunity for print and that better bond with local communities with newsprint. Because what I find is, in the digital realm, it's just so fast, and the thing is, you'll never find the story again. Whereas some people need to pick up a paper if it's got community content and talk about Mildred down the road. She was in a car accident. Oh, I knew her. You know, that sort of community spirit and that interfacing with different, because a lot of people know everyone in a region or know of them, and so they're genuinely interested in an event in the town. And the media the new media that Max is talking, will never talk about anyone in your town unless they're a serial murderer or something like that. So is that the niche you see in the future, that community's harvesting that community spirit and having that piece of paper that can hang around for a few days so you can show someone? Whereas, like I say, on the phone, you know, it's just unless you save it somewhere, you'll probably never find the thing because it's gone so far behind every other story that's come on.
Yeah, Bill, look, I agree to a certain extent with what Max said before, just with regards to News Corp. I mean, at the end of the day, you know, I understand the going online thing, because at the end of the day, most of the stuff or most of the editorials and information pieces that were appearing in, you know, newspapers like the Post and the Bully and the Courier Mail were all things that people would expect to see online, but not just from Australian companies, but from overseas corporations as well, like Reuters, you know, British companies. You know, that network is not the only one to carry those stories. So at the end of the day, I mentioned this to Max when we were talking before the show, you can't Google what's happening in Mareeba today, or any other town in outback Queensland, or actually even in Cairns. Because if the local newspaper doesn't cover that as a story, then there's no way that you can actually get a footprint of it. So that's where the local newspaper comes in, because you will find out about, you know, the little Johnny who got selected for Queensland to play rugby league. You won't find that in those metropolitan papers. So that's vitally important, and the importance of having people. Because at the end of the day, it's all about journalism and, you know, creating jobs and things like that. So, you know, for us, it was, you know, finding journalists, finding sales reps, people to work in the office. I mean, nowadays, there's a bit of a revival also, not just in newspapers, but there's also those real small community backyard ones where they're basically quarterfoils. And they're basically, I mean, I don't know if I agree with them, to be honest, because some of them don't have any journalistic experience and are basically just put together by people who have a bit of spare time on their hands. And I don't know if you can classify them as newspapers, but they do a particular job. They bring across small, important things that are vitally important to those people in those communities. Ourselves, who are a fully fledged newspaper, you know, with all the bells and whistles, so to speak, with regards to distribution and printing and staff and what have you, it's very, very important that we also keep abreast of what's happening in our local community as well. There are some news stories that we don't touch because we know that people will get them before we can actually print them through other mediums. So that's why we like to stick with what's happening locally, through the local area, the local region. And of course, since the demise of News Corp, we've had, you know, 4 News Corp newspapers around us close up. So we've had to fill that void within those regions so that people don't feel left out. I think when the Advertiser up here, which was a News Corp newspaper that closed down in the same town that we're in, I don't think the residents here actually noticed it in a big way because we were actually here in a more presence. But when the Tableander closed down, or when the Mossman Gazette closed down, and to a certain extent the Innisfail Advocate, those people in those communities actually felt the loss of those newspapers because their stories weren't being told. And you can you know, feel for those people, but we've tried to fill the void. You know, since the News Corp closure, we doubled our distribution, doubled our paging, doubled our staff. So we're trying to fill the void that especially the Tableander left in the southern Tablelands. Mossman, Port Douglas, and even Innisfail to a certain extent is a little bit too far away from us, but we're still trying. I mean, we try to you know, explore different avenues all the time. But it is an interesting situation. But you know, the Express has been, or our newspaper has been online for 10 years. You know, but there's a huge difference between what we're doing and what News Corp are doing. Our stories are actually free of charge. So you can go online and you can view the entire paper, the entire edition, free of charge. Plus, you know, you have your Facebook avenue and your Twitter avenue and so forth, and they're all free of charge as well. We had a situation where, you know, just prior to News Corp closing their regional papers down, that people were getting very upset with them because every time a local story came up, people had a paywall to go through first. And so people were very frustrated and thinking that, you know, why are we paying for the local news? It's a very good question, isn't it?
Just on that, with regards to the community and that, without local papers, things like the Coranda Range bypass and the group that's activating that, and then in the past you had the people organising for Mareeba Hospital when there was threats to or lack of upgrade to the Mareeba Hospital. But what the community newspaper does is it reports that when another newspaper it's not of interest, and the other thing it allows local comment from local people and to get their feelings across or their emotions or attachments to that activity. It sort of generates even more comment, and also with a hard copy, it's something that can be passed around and people can reference. You know, there's either someone's there who's been quoted. They usually know the person who's been quoted, and they can ring them up and get a bit more detail on the issue and that. And they're the things that, you know, the Cairns Post is not even if it survives, is not going to report a lot of the things that are going on in Mareeba, and that are important to the community. So that's one of the things I see in regards to opportunities that are out there. But just over to you, Scott. I mean, you're just entering this field. How daunting is it, and how much sort of relief do you get in regards to just talking to Carl and Max in regards to, hey, there is an opportunity out there, and maybe it's going to be worthwhile with some persistence?
Well, I was actually agreeing with everything you were saying before, Bill, because even though I'm new to doing newspapers, I understand the significance of them and the importance of them. You know, I come from a magazine background where when you look at my paper, it's probably got a fair amount of content that I've learnt that works out of magazines, because in a magazine, we're actually more intimate and personal with people. People pick it up in terms of, you know, what's in here. And I have a belief in a thing which I call surprise and delight. I like people to think that they're getting a paper and something new. I was going to say to you, I had this corny little idea of, instead of calling it a newspaper, it's a new paper, because every time we come out with another one, it's a new paper. And people won't have an expectation to find out what's in it. You know, what's in it this week that I didn't know about. So what you were saying before, Bill, was right. We do a lot of profiles in our paper as well, because we want to educate the people in their area. And a lot of people are interested in knowing about the other people in their community. And if we can, you know, share that with people, then we're getting a lot of response to that as well. Not only that, the history of the place as well that we're sharing with people. Max has a friend called Ian Doyle. He sat me down one night and over a wine and said, I just want to make sure you understand what your job is, you know, because you are the collector of history. And I went, right, okay, hang on, because what's really important is that what you publish, what goes in there, that is what is history. So when in years to come, people go looking back, they'll go, that was the date that this happened, that was the name of the person, all those details have got to be accurate and correct, because that is what we're doing. So it's very important that we exist and we publish this information on a regular basis, and we share it with people who want to know this sort of information. Then later on down the track, want to know that information as well. But one of the things that happened when we started the paper, and even before, was that and Carl will know this very well, in terms of that people didn't know that people had died. You know, so the funeral notices, which was a major thing to bring into the paper. And we've got good contacts with the funeral directors and stuff like that, who are amazed that we have a cutoff that's like to the last minute. You know, if you've got something you've got to tell people about it, you know, the death that happened, we've got to get it into the paper, because lo and behold, you know, if it's not out there, somebody's going to find out their best friend died from somebody else. So it's really important that we get that out there. So we see ourselves as a paper as being, you know, if we didn't do it, somebody else will do it. I mean, I've got no fear of that. And I was going to say before, when Carl was saying, I looked after a lot of car dealerships over my time with advertising. I remember David Carmichael used to complain about the growth of used car dealerships in the area. It meant that he wasn't doing his job. If we had the opportunity for other car dealerships used car dealerships to open, we weren't doing a good job selling used cars. So I have this feeling that if we're doing a good job selling a newspaper and producing a product that people want, a lot of people are going to start up newspapers around us and doing other things because we're not doing a good job. But I just think I would come back to this thing where what a newspaper is, I think, for people now. And I think it's going to full circle. I mean, why do people have vinyl records now? I think it's that contact and the human element of holding something, having a relationship with this thing that you have. And as you said, Bill, you're going to show people something that's in the paper, remind people what's in there. And we've just got to get at this world out of our head of saying it's just for old people, you know, because we have a lot of stories in there that are for young people who are doing things. We've got, you know, Billy just won an award, you know, Karen just, you know, was swimming on the weekend. It's the planting trees next week. So we've got a lot of kids stuff in our paper, but we've got an awful lot of sport. And I can tell you that the ladies who put the, you know, the bowls results in and the golf results in and table bowls results in and stuff, that is what fills our paper up and why people pick up the paper every week to get it, to see what's in there. So I see a great opportunity and a great future of newspapers. I think it's the complete opposite of the demise and end of newspapers at all. I think it's actually, you know, this could be a golden era for newspapers to refocus and rethink about what their purpose is and what our content should be, and then make sure that we're obviously relevant to those people to pick it up and make sure, you know, that they really want to get it. So that's my spiel. There you go.
Well, I think one of the things that you can rest assured or have some relief in is the fact that I doubt if there'll ever be an attempt by a large news company to come along and buy out all these little companies that form up in the future, because it's just not in their, it's not going to be in their bean canner's sight. So whereas if you go back to the past when all those papers were independent and sort of running along before newspaper News Limited moved in, maybe being assured that that won't ever happen again gives you some confidence in going forward and growing. But the other thing I was just talking about, sort of cooperation. I mean, you three people know each other, although Max is not in the newspaper business anymore. But
he's a godlike figure in the newspaper business. That's why.
Yeah, he's a deity sitting above. But I'm just looking at your area, Scott. I can see things like maybe if there was a corridor system, like if you're in Ayr, Carter's Towers, Newenden, Richmond, Julia Creek, Cloncurry, and then to Mount Isa. That's a corridor it's a good sweeping corridor. It provides, is there an opportunity to sort of think in regards, well, if we pick up on a corridor, get the expertise, we can run down that corridor. Whereas, say, Carl's sitting up on the Cape, he can sort of look at, well, I can grow instead of getting in to that corridor down there.
You've got to understand sorry to interrupt. You understand as I learned, the parochialism of these towns. You know, like everybody wants their own paper. You know, they don't want this sort of shared, sort of like blancmange of paper going across an area. I'm looking at Bowen, for example, you know, and Max is a great advisor on that. Like the parochialism between those towns, Bowen doesn't want a Whitsunday newspaper in Bowen. They want a Bowen paper for Bowen. You know, I'm lucky I can do Ayr and Home Hill and the Burdekin, but like, you know, I couldn't bring in another. I thought I'd be able to bring Bowen into, you know, the Burdekin, but it's only, you know, an hour away, 3/4 hour. And they said, no way, like you can't, they don't want to talk about, they don't want that news, you know. And we are hyper local, you know, our focus is, you know, Mrs. Bonaventura was 103 on Friday. You know, that's the stuff that we put in the paper.
Yeah, I understand that, but I'm just looking at it more like a series of independent papers in regards to helping people pop up, or even if they're co-edited or whatever. But I mean, they're still their own singular independent papers, but they might have still be in one group, if you know what I mean, with finances and, you know, having a financial structure or something like that, but still be interested in providing their local news, plus also inter-regional news that's still relevant, because there's a lot of things in agriculture and things like that that runs right across the region, or the railway line that goes out there, the minerals or whatever. So there's still a connectivity, but as you say, but they're still independent operators. I'm just looking at corridors and distribution without people crossing over too much.
I think the economic viability of the things to be questioned, though. Like, the overheads are quite large for a newspaper, no matter what you do, whatever size you are. I mean, I was surprised, and the whole thing about printing surprised me, because you can imagine my cost in printing 10,000 issues of a 120, 160 page magazine every month, compared to printing 3,000 copies of a 32-page newspaper. There's a significant difference in price. But even a 32-page, newspaper being printed and distributed, they're paying for staff and overheads and things like that. It's a little bit hard to make it economically viable in some areas. I'm looking at Charters Towers on the basis that I'm getting support from the people in the town, insofar as, I mean, obviously I'm pretty sure that people want to buy the paper, but selling the paper doesn't pay for anything much more than possibly the printing. So, and I'm a paid for paper. Carl's a free paper, which is a whole different dynamic entirely. And he gets, and I mean, I was a free magazine. I understand the whole process of getting advertisers and convincing them to go into it, and he does significantly well at doing that, because he's got a unique product that reaches a huge audience, and he's been doing it for a long time and proven the fact. When you're a startup and you're saying you're hoping that the local people are going to pick up the paper, and significantly enough that you're going to attract enough advertisers to support the whole venture, it's somebody's got to take a risk. We're all taking a risk, but we believe that the future is going to be sustainable, and that we're going to make a profit out of it at the end of the day as well.
Well, maybe Carl can just give us the audience a bit of idea about the logistics and the distribution, getting a paper printed, where you have to get it printed, and how many operators can actually print it for you, and B, getting it to the marketplace.
Yeah, look, initially when we first started, we were actually printed in Brisbane, believe it or not. And I fully understand what Max was saying earlier with regards to the cost and so forth of distributing newspapers. I mean, it was costing us $4,000 a week just to fly it up from Brisbane. And we did that for about 12 to 13 months before we came across the the Mackay printing press, which was open at the time. So yeah, it was costing us a fortune to get it brought up from Brisbane. Of course, distribution is one of those things that's vitally important. You do have to have a very good network of people, of businesses, and of businesses that are very much on your side. If they can see, and this is where being local comes into play enormously for newspapers. Because once businesses see that you have a legitimate footprint in your town, in your region, they'll bend over backwards to help you. We in the early days, and even now to a certain extent, we used to just swap some advertising and so forth with regards to some services. And we still do that to a certain extent because it's beneficial to both parties. We use a company to bring our papers up to Cooktown and the Gulf and Peninsula regions, for some exchange of advertising, which does them, well as well, because it's advertising their products too. So at the end of the day, the distribution is so important, but also what's important is actually getting out on time as well. We have had, situations in the past where when we were printed in Mackay, Rockhampton and so forth, with the road situation, especially during cyclone season, where we found it difficult to get the paper up on time. But touch wood, I think in the 11 years that we've been open, I think we only once came out on a Thursday, because we are a Wednesday newspaper. So we've got a pretty good track record when it comes to that type of thing. But communities are very demanding from local newspapers. They like to own it. We encourage people to send in their stories, not necessarily us go out and search for stories. So we did that from the very start. And now we find that we have so much news that we could put in that we have to actually hold it off for a week because and prioritize things because we just got so much of it. At the end of the day, you know, our biggest news sources are our councils, of which we have 4 councils that we cover, our local schools, and the police. So, you know, and obviously sport, which is huge, especially for kids and seniors as well. So that's the important thing. It's about getting the local aspect of your community together, and then transpiring that into print.
Is there nothing on the horizon technology-wise to sort of newspaper more readily and more locally, or it's just going to be that continuous great big operation, actually, an expensive operation to actually print them? Is there nothing technology can offer to? I mean, obviously.
I went looking into it, Bill. I thought, because I didn't know how to do this as well, I thought maybe I'll find this out. And I've been looking into digital printing, but the cost factor is just huge. I mean, the investment's been made by News Corp to spend that much money on building a press, you know, which creates a product that's very cheap at the end of the day. I mean, I actually pay extra for the stock that I'm on compared to the stock that the Bulletin comes out on, for example, because I like a whiter paper. But there was an opportunity. There was a time, pardon me, in France where they were doing this, where you could actually go to a newsagent and press a button and they would print the newspaper for you at the kiosk. You know, so the process was completely the other way around. But you digitally set, pardon me, the file, and you paid a certain fee to get a copy of the paper. And I thought that might be another way to go, but apparently it closed for I don't know what reason, but that was some idea in advance. I thought that was a paradigm shift and taking away the idea of big presses and distribution, and you make the distribution at the location. But that was something I thought of that could happen.
I think the printed word will be around a long time, especially in the smaller communities. Like things like when I was looking after the North Queensland Newspaper Company, I used to try to encourage the editors. You know, I didn't have the editors are totally independent of me, but I used to try to encourage them to run detailed show results and the Eisteddfod results. Now, Townsville, they saw that as being a bit beneath them. You know, they wanted the big regional daily. We don't publish that grassroots stuff, but that's risk to the mill for you guys. You know how important that is. If, like Mrs. Smith won the fruitcake section and got a $2 certificate. I mean, that might seem like small beer to an editor of a regional daily, but it's absolute gold for you guys. But I couldn't get that through to the editors. Well, I had some success, but now, you know, you don't see, if the Townsville show's on, you might see a few photos of a kid on a Ferris wheel, but that's it. You go to your papers, I'm sure the people just gulp up that information. And coming back to that parochial thing that both of you are living and breathing, Ayr and Home Hill, to News Corporation, Atherton and Mareeba, those two, they look at a map and say, what have we got 2 papers up there for? They're only half an inch apart. You know, we only need 1 paper. Now, if you, when I had some pressure from the Ayr Chamber of Commerce people to close down the Home Hill Observer, and I went over to Home Hill and knocked on all the doors over there, and you know, it's like oil and water. Now, like, if you went over to Home Hill and picked up a local girl, if you were an Ayr resident, you went over to Home Hill and took a girl home from a dance, you'd get your head punched in, because Home Hill and Ayr, it's oil and water. Like Atherton and Mareeba, they're totally different communities of interest. But nobody in News Limited headquarters in Sydney or to a lesser extent, I suppose, Brisbane, have any idea of what makes a small town newspaper tick. I was probably the last of the Mohicans, because I did run, and I learned so much over those years running those small papers. I remember the first editor's job was the Northern Miner, and I was getting all this, and remember, I did my training at the Melbourne Herald, so I looked at all this submitted copy, golf notes and all this chatty bowl stuff, and I started to rewrite it all into what I thought was good quality journalism. Now, the town was in uproar because I was changing the submitted notes. Now, I learned a valuable lesson there that not only is that stuff written by locals in the language of locals, but it's free. So why wouldn't I run it word for word? And so over those many years that I was going around the smaller towns, I just learned so much about what makes these communities tick. And you guys have got your fingers deep in the soil of your communities, and you're instantly accountable, the good, the bad, and the ugly. You know, you walk out that front door, Carl, and everybody knows who you are. If there's something in the paper that's wrong, you'll hear about it the minute you walk out the door.
Absolutely.
And that's great. Nobody would know who the editor of the bulletin was, but everybody knows Scott Morrison and Carl Portella, and they know where they, and they might walk in and say, I want to see the editor, and the girl might say, oh, look, he's busy. They'll walk through past her and into your office. So you're absolutely committed to the local communities, and that's fantastic.
Well, all around the world, there must be redundant news presses around. You think we can put an offer in somewhere for $1 and get one shipped to northern Queensland and far north Queensland?
Well, that print centre in Townsville cost $63 million in 1990 to build. So I don't know, you wouldn't, I mean, New Zealand may want to get out of printing newspapers, but they'll be sold as, you know, factories or something. I don't think you'd pick it up cheap. And I don't know that you need that investment. You guys are, you know, as long as you can get it at a reasonable price, you don't have to own the printing press, I don't think.
I was just thinking about if there's enough work for a printing press, maybe an independent sort of person would get the printer for multiple publications and just run them off as required, different days and that. So
I'm pretty sure that'll be the next step.
Rockhampton's doing it, Carl?
Yeah, look, I mean, I'm not sure if you gentlemen are aware, but there is an organisation that's just recently purchased the News Corp site at Rockhampton. So that's Damien Morgan and his organisation have purchased that, and that's in the hope that, of course, that once the rest of News Corp shuts down, that all of the regional publications, around 50 of them there are now in the state that are under the Queensland Country Press Association, will get printed there. So, you know, if you've got 50 newspapers that you're printing, that's going to be a pretty good little business. So, yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, the News Corp site, as Max said, in Townsville, is their state-of-the-art site. It's their newest site in the country. So you would think that it would be probably the last to shut, because it is, you know, very high-tech and prints very well. So you would think that it'd be one of the last ones that they would shut down. But, hey, it's News Corp we're talking about.
There's always opportunity in the wind.
Absolutely.
Okay. Just in regards to what newspapers deliver, what's left of them anyway, do you think that the larger papers like the Courier Mail, you've still got the Townsville Bulletin and the Cairns Post, but do you think the media in general and the larger media has sided with different things in regards to getting information across, like with the coronavirus and that, it's sort of lines of the paper is really following the government's lead, or whatever the government's saying, they reiterate, you know, and we're seeing that in with these escapees or people who sort of break quarantine and that, and it's like a witch hunt, but the media also adds to that witch hunt rather than querying, well, maybe after 18 months of being locked down, maybe these people are justified in regards to wanting to make their escape at times. So, and it's also, say, climate change. The media has picked a side and is running with that and doesn't really tolerate dissenting voices. Do you feel that's something that's come into the media over the years, and basically it doesn't have the openness to allow other commentary and have a different opinion.
Well, I might kick it off, Bill. I think there is certainly a groupthink across the media. You know, there is a feeling that you've got a lot of young journos running at the checkpoints, if you like, the chief of staff and editors. They're mostly young people in their 30s, and they've come through a school system and a sort of a politically correct system where if you came out and said, I don't support gay marriage, you'd probably get your head kicked in by the 30 plus people out there. So you're dealing with people who have a collective, and I think this is the downside of newspapers closing down, is you've got social media silos of opinion. And look, you know, I could be as guilty as the left, progressive lefties who sit inside their little silo and all they hear is their own opinion echoed around the chamber. And I'm an old conservative, you know, yesterday's sort of man, a patriarchal, whatever, you know, how they ever see me.
God likes you.
And I like reading things that support my point of view, but I also read widely, and I think I can debate anybody because I do read newspapers and I read the Australian, I read all the background stuff and the Spectator magazine, and I also watch the ABC. Now, a lot of my colleagues don't watch the ABC because they're so far left. So I think we're seeing a bit of a groupthink developing, Bill, amongst these young editors who all believe that we're going to rack and ruin with the climate change. We've got to rewrite history because the Aborigines have been denied their rightful place, and you know they were about to split the atom when Captain Cook turned up. It's a whole different view of the world that old blokes like me are confronted with when you look at how the media is run. So yes, there is, editors are generally independent, News Corp editors. You know, if you look at the history, Murdoch got Gough Whitlam in the 70s. He then succeeded in getting him thrown out. He got Kevin Rudd in, he supported Kevin Rudd, and got him put out, supported Tony Abbott. I mean, it's no point owning a newspaper and not using your power. If you believe something's being done wrong in your community, I'm sure you would jump onto your soapbox and scream about it. You know, Scott, that's the issue you had down there with closures of the Burdekin Bridge, and it's a narrow ribbon between Ayr and Home Hill, and you had closures for many hours at a time while they did maintenance on the bridge. Now, the solution is a second bridge, or certainly a widening of the bridge. Now, Scott made noise about that. Carl, I'm sure there are issues up there. I know the hospital was one back in the earlier days. Bypasses, these are things where opinion is welcomed. And if you own the paper, what's the point of owning it unless you stand up for what you believe is right? But I think with the major papers and the major publishing houses, you know, the old Fairfax Group and News Corp, there does tend to be a group thing. Certainly the ABC. I mean, you know exactly what line they're going to take with any of these socially progressive issues. You don't hear the other side at all.
No, I agree. I had a problem. I've had a problem with the ABC in terms of what's happened with AstraZeneca, for example. I think the start of that, without the sensationalisation that the ABC go to the side effects, we would have not had anywhere near the problem we've got now. I think that was a bad move. I think they went too far down that track, and we're suffering the consequences of that now. But you know, I think trying to go back to, I've lost the question what it was really, basically. But I think that the point is that with media as well. I mean, we're finding that when I was with an advertising agency, for example, my background in advertising, having clients who buy advertising space and so forth, for them on their behalf. I mean, we would sort those out based on the audience and the, where we're going to get the most value for our money. We'd spend time doing that. It all came down to analytics and statistics and things like that. Consequently, when Facebook came in, which was the great decimator of advertising agencies, once upon a time it was a very profitable business to be in. In my business, we looked at the total account for the client. So we were in charge of not only all the creative and the production, everything like that, but also all of the accounting and paying the bills and so forth. So that was totally what we did. When Facebook came in, advertisers suddenly thought, we don't have to advertise anymore. We can get the secretary to use it to do Facebook and it's free. And so advertising agencies basically started to die straight away from there. So then when you're dealing, on the other hand, with other media buying companies, those same like Max was saying with regards to young journalists and so forth, you're dealing with a media buyer who's had no life experience, but basically, as the world is that if you do what you're told to do by somebody else and then you won't get in trouble, well, let's do that. Rather than let's take a chance and risk and put your nuts on the line. And if I get it wrong, I'm going to be decimated. So let's not take a risk. Let's just do what everybody else says we should do. And I've found that all the way along, particularly with media buying and stuff like that. It was basically with a magazine in those terms, was that a magazine is like right down the bottom list to where the advertising dollar goes to. So the start off would be, okay, you've got a website, what are your numbers like? We say, well, we've got a website, but like we're not focusing on that, we're a magazine. People really want to pick up a magazine. Oh, we're not interested in that. We just want to know what your figures are for your website. And so website and digital advertising per se, I'm yet to find out how it pays off. I keep asking people all the time, okay, so you've got a website, are you making money out of it? Does it pay its way? Does it even make a profit out of it? Because we've all gone down the path in a lot of ways with digital where we're thinking, and now it's just flooded the market basically. I mean, the email platform is just full of spam and rubbish, and we've lost the opportunity to use sending things out via email because it's just clutter. It just goes into your spam filter. We've now got the same thing happening with Facebook. I mean, there's ads everywhere on it. I mean, I'm finding this thing now with LinkedIn. I thought LinkedIn was going to be a great little platform, and I've used it quite well over the years. But now I'm now getting ads popping up all the time, which is annoying me. They didn't ask for, but obviously they're making more of a dollar out of it. So all the digital platforms, I'm suggesting in terms of media per se, it's gone down the path of the easiest way, the less effort required. Don't take a risk, don't try anything, just do what's been done before. And consequently, I think that's right across the board with creativity and production, things like that. I was going to say, Max, I think one of the things I'm finding is that it's very hard to find people with passion, and I when I got into advertising, I've got to tell you, that was full of passion in those days. Everybody just loved making stuff, we're making advertising, TV ads and everything else. And very pleased with what you produced because you got that satisfaction. I'm finding that with newspapers as well. I mean, every day, when the paper comes back from the printer, we go and sit down. We actually sometimes have breakfast together and we go through the paper and read it and see what's in it and how it looks. And so we're really passionate and we're in love with it, So, I think this is one of the things that happens in a small organisation, that it's really just what we do. And we're a craft, we're just creators of stuff, so we get that joy of creating the thing and trying to pass it on to other people, say, this is actually what this business is like now. We make stuff that, my biggest fan is my mother, like she shares it. I had to drop off every Sunday. I take 8 copies to the retirement village where she is and she distributes them. So she's my distributor there. So and all the other old ladies who come from the area love to get the paper. But anyway, I was just thinking, this is the thing that happens, I think, we're a small business like other small businesses where we basically find something that we like to do every day and we'd like to produce something. That's a great way to be, I think. But I'm just finding the satisfaction with media across the board. It's lack of, I don't think they're passionate about it, to be honest. I think the passion's gone out of a lot of media. I saw one young Hayden who worked for us. He's the first guy when we started the paper. was just Hayden, Stacey, and my wife and I. So the paper. He went on to Win TV, Win News. It's a fantastic step up for him. And I saw him today at this opening we had to go to, and he said he's now him and a cameraman. That's all there is in Win News in Townsville. 2 people. There was 6 or 8 or something. They've all gone. They've now got 2 people handling, and he says, "Oh, it's statewide now." You know, so well, how many stories can the guy with one reporter with one cameraman do in Townsville as well? You know, so that's the way it's going. You know.
With you, Carl, in regards to with newspapers picking aside, or the larger ones, we had the thing with the reef just recently and the endangerment situation, UNESCO putting that on, or thinking about put on. But the thing that's not reported so much, which you do have an opportunity, because you've got growers and that up there, they're the ones who bear the brunt of these sort of paranoia about the reef. It gives them an opportunity with your newspaper to put their point across at times in regards to doing a great job, and they're not, you know, wreckers and things like that. If we don't have the smaller media get those stories across for growers, graziers, and other people, all we'll ever hear about is farmers are villains and vandals, and them never getting a Guernsey. Is that one of the things that you think the regional papers can do, is give voices to people who are actually being vilified by a lot of this group think or pick a side?
Absolutely, Bill. Look, I think it's so important to give that voice to those organisations. I mean, on the tablelands here, we have FNQ growers who represent most of the fruit and vegetable growers across the region and so forth. It's so important to get those people involved in what is happening, you know, especially with the reef and you know, revegetation and all that sort of stuff, and anything to do with agriculture. It's very, very important. And they look at us because they know that most of the people on the land actually read the newspaper. They love picking it up. If I can just go back, I mean, we had COVID come in, you know, in February last year, and it hit everyone across the country. You know, there were a lot of newspapers and so forth that closed up during that period. We actually went into a 6-week lockdown where we took our computers home and we worked from home, although our journalists found it very difficult to do that because they were cooped inside and weren't really able to do their job. So we actually got the 2 journalists back into the office, and they were the only 2 in the office. But we did something extraordinary during that period, because the government was sending us so many different mixed messages. You know, you can't go outside, you can't go anywhere, you can only go out for essentials, stay at home or you're going to catch the COVID. And the messages were so different. And so we tried to work out what is an essential thing. And we worked out that, hey, look, if I need a new set of tyres on my car, for me, it's essential. So I'll go out and fit a new set of tyres, because not all businesses were forced to shut. It was only your pubs and clubs where people sort of congregated. But your car yards, your hardware stores, they were all open for business, but they had no clientele. So what we did in that case is that we stood back and we said, okay, what can we do? What can we do to help? So we actually reduced our advertising price for about 6 months. Now, you could take out a full page ad with us for $250, okay? So at some stages, we had some 22 to 30 pages of full page ads in that particular week's edition. Now, when that eventually ended, it was quite extraordinary, because a lot of people that took up the advantage of the $250 full page were people that never actually advertised in print before. And they actually realized how much of an impact that print advertising actually had on their business. So when all that finished, we actually retained them, which is a wonderful thing. And our readership obviously grew, and you know, it's been great ever since. But yeah, look, at the end of the day, it's so vitally important to to have those little community organisations that you can give a little voice to. I mean, I remember when we first started, and we talk about organisations, and I'm talking about Lions and Rotary and Apex to a certain extent. You know, when we first started, we offered each of those clubs a monthly column where they could send us in a little column that they wrote without us interfering with, and we would run it for them free of charge. And we had 6 Lions clubs from across the Tablelands and 4 Rotary clubs, and we were just jam-packed with information, and people just wanted to get that information about what those organisations were doing, and it was terrific. And we do the same thing with a lot of, you know, nowadays the Men's Shed, Rotary that still, and Lions that still sort of have taken it up as well. So, but it's important. I mean, as far as we're concerned, what I see and what I like to nurture is regional journalism. You know, I'm a huge advocate of training up young kids to basically, you know, do a trade that's a bit of a dying art, really. You know, I've got a young journalist that I took on about 3 years ago. He's on his 3rd year at university. I took him straight out of school. I'm putting him through the Deakin University course in Melbourne, and I know I've got him. I knew I had him for 3 years, and he's still with me. And I've discovered another young lass who is so keen. She does 10 hours a week with us now. At the end of the year, I'll take her on as well. She's her family's got a history of journalists in the family. The parents are over the moon that I'm offering her a full-time job and putting her through university as well at the end of the year. And you know, for me, because I'm finding it a little bit difficult to attract journalists to a rural area, is what's working for me. So I'm offering these kids an opportunity to save themselves a bit of money by not going to uni and by having a full-time job while they do the university studies. So that's working well for me at the moment.
Right.
We've gone past the hour. I just want to get one more thing in before we do a final run around for wrap up. I know in regards to parochialism, I think in a lot of ways, parochialism actually holds back development or moving forward of greater regions and the greater areas. I mean, I think sometimes parochialism and the contest between Townsville and Cairns and Mackay and Rockhampton and Mackay and Townsville, it's sometimes counterproductive for growing forward of the whole regions. So in going forward, I sort of put it to you gentlemen in regards to, I know you're focusing like on small areas and that's a lot, but don't you feel that there needs to be some interconnection between the regions through your networks in regards to, just take the instance of the Coranda Range Road. I mean, now that we've gone over and we're going into the hoopla about the Olympics, I mean, you got Cairns, you know, selling itself out to get a square stadium, you know, and basically that becomes their all-in look, you know, get a square stadium for Cairns. And meanwhile, you know, things like the Coranda Range Road has dropped off the radar, and it's something that needs to be fostered between Cairns and the Tablelands. So you think it needs to be that interconnection between regions, so those small medias at least pick up on topics that are beneficial for the greater region and run with them conjunctively. And I'm sure like Townsville and Ayr and Charters Towers with the Burdekin Dam, you know, it's important stage 2 of the Burdekin Dam goes up to the 4.6 metres in the future for the greater region. But if you get too parochial just on your township, some of those issues probably won't get enough airing in the regions, and they'll never get any airing in Brisbane anyway. So you think maybe there's still a need for maybe a regional association of editors where they can pick some important topics to regions and run with them conjunctively?
Yeah, Bill, look, if I can just expand on that a little bit. I mean, the Coranda Range Road is a classic example. And you're right. I think, people like myself and Scott, and we have, Peter from Cairns Local News in Cairns, and a lot of the independent newspapers up and down the coast. There's nothing stopping us from, getting together and putting forward, various things across our communities. With regard to the Coranda Range Road and specifically, we've been pushing this quite a lot over the last probably couple of years. It's so vitally important to the development of the Gulf and Peninsula area, which is an absolute gold mine from a farming perspective, we feel. But we have had a little bit of backlash with regards to where this proposed new bypass is going to come out in Cairns. Ideally, it would be around the Redlynch area. However, once the Redlynch residents found out about that, they're up in arms, and now they're looking for an exit to be somewhere around Edmonton, which defeats the whole purpose of getting a new road to Cairns, because at the end of the day, what we want to do is access their ports, their international terminals, so that we can send our freight and so forth overseas. Coming out of Edmonton, you may as well use the other road, you know what I mean, and go up that way. So it's actually quite pointless. So at the end of the day, I think it's very important that, as independent newspaper owners, that we get together and, yes, by all means, put across a unified front for a particular project. And the Coranda Range Road is a perfect example of that.
In regards to the Coranda Range Road, it's the concept that's important, and the actions of the government to get committed to it. And what the final route is couldn't be the focus at this point in time. It's actually A, the need, and B, the government's got to be pulled into the conversation and come up with the proper plan and the best plan, and then it gives the options that can be discussed. But it's really, I see it, the jobs as the newspapers, not only in Mareeba and Cairns, but also further up the Cape. To pull the question in is, our economic development hinges on this road, and whatever its final form is, just get it started. And that's like the Burdekin Dam. It's really, this fudge that's going on with Sunwater to maybe put 2 metres or maybe 6 metres on top of the Burdekin Dam wall. That's just a fudge, that's a blockage of progress, and the focus has got to be getting onto the full 14 metres, and that needs to be run, in Townsville, Ayr, Carter's, Towers, and all those places as a combined sort of effort, on a routine basis. And I think that's the way I'd sort of hope in the future, as more and more players come in and fill the void of News Limited, they can have this sort of confederation just in general, where they're all talking to each other and picking things that need to be addressed for our regions, because it's definitely nothing's going to be printed in the Courier Mail if that becomes the only News Limited paper that even is of any importance to us. They'll be just telling us the news of Brisbane and how well the building for the Olympic Games is going the next 10 years as they take out the wealth out of our regions.
Just on parochialism, Bill, I think there are two forms of parochialism. One is good, one is bad. A bit like debt, you can have good debt and bad debt. I think the Cairns Townsville parochialism is a waste of everybody's time, and it's like a girls' boarding school set up. But in relation to what Carl and Scott and Peter are doing up in their various home patches, they should be proudly parochial and grab every ounce of news that appears and be proud to publish it. And I know they are. When it comes to taking a broader, more regional view, I think if you were to start running stories ad nauseum about regional issues, and you were because of that, you left out the Brandon Bowles notes. You get garroted in the main street.
Yes.
So I think there are two issues there. One, you have to be proudly parochial about the product you're putting out. But then obviously as a resident of your community, you have a view about what's good for your region and good for the north or the far north, wherever you happen to be operating. So I don't know that your papers can be all things to all people. I wish they could be, but if you farm your backyard well, you'll be successful as you're seeing. But if you step outside there and start to get involved in bigger issues at the expense of your local readers, I think you need a different organ, a different platform to elevate those big issues. And look, if you got big enough and successful enough, there's no reason why you blokes couldn't be running a Townsville Bulletin type paper or a Cairns Post type paper down the track. And that's the platform, I think, from which you can exercise that power. And look, be assured, the politicians in Brisbane and Canberra will be getting your papers, and the staff would be clipping out anything to do with local issues that the local member ought to be aware of. And you'd know that, Carl, with Bob Catter and Knuth up in that part of the world. You put something in there that touches a nerve in Brisbane, they'll know about it, that's for sure. Same with you, Scott. That Burdekin Bridge issue, somebody in Brisbane will have cut that out of your paper and stuck it in front of the minister's face. Whether he does anything about it, that's another matter. But
same, we've got the Burdekin deviation to look at next to Max as well.
Yeah, and that pipeline project is another one that is exciting.
Yeah, I think taking your point though, Bill, I guess another way to look at that is if we had a shared insert, something that was common that we could so it didn't take away. And Max is completely right. I mean, if I go away from hyperlocal, I start disintegrating the effect of what the paper does. But I can see there's an opportunity to do things that are shared in terms of, produced to this thing and goes into these other newspapers. That could possibly work because it's seen in a different light as well, and I think it's an affordable way of going as well. I'm actually looking into doing my magazine now in a format of like a Sunday newspaper magazine, inserted into the newspapers. So I'll be calling up, Carl at some point in time and saying, Carl, look, would you like a lovely, wonderful, glossy, colourful magazine to go into your paper and distribute, across the thousands that you go to, But there's ways and means of doing something like that. And Max is completely right. If I get away from being hyper-local, then I'm becoming fragmented, and I have to be totally focused on the issues in this region. And I can find another example of doing that, but this is where I'm at. But an insert might be another occasion.
That's a good idea. I like that.
Or maybe just a half a page in the whole thing, but common, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
Carl?
Yeah, look, I mean, Peter and I, with Cairns Local News, we do share our stories at times. It is important. I mean, the Coranda Range Road, for argument's sake, it's of vital importance to the tablelands and the Gulf. However, people from the city in Cairns don't actually see it as such. They don't really, at times, look like they give two hoots about it, because they only have to drive it, maybe 3 or 4 times a year whenever they go fishing or on holidays or come and visit the area. It's a little bit more important to the people that live across the tablelands, simply because I think that they understand that by having a better corridor where we can get our produce to market a lot quicker via the ports and the airport, that it would open up the area, especially around Laura, and the Gulf and Peninsula, so dramatically. It would be unbelievable. The southern tablelands would just boom. We're just waiting to explode. I mean, the government keeps going on and on about the southeast corner just, filling up with people all the time. It's because they're not putting any other infrastructure anywhere else. That's the reason why everyone wants to stay in the city. If they bothered to actually spend some money in rural areas, some of the people that want to settle in this country will probably choose a quieter local region as long as they've got the infrastructure there that's viable for them to make a living on. So at the end of the day, that's why it's so important for us, as you say, not just to bring across the local issues, but something as simple as a road between Cairns and Mareeba has got so much larger implications. Not just for the region, but for everyone that actually comes up from down south. I mean, I'm sure the Coranda Range Road is a wonderful drive, and maybe they could leave it as such. They could leave it as a scenic tourist drive. And hey, maybe you should put $1 toll on it if you want to travel on it. I don't know, but having an access road, an alternate road, would be wonderful for our heavy vehicles.
The other thing is, like you say, Cairns is not alert to the situation, but the thing is, what Cairns needs to realise, it needs to grow, because it's got to find, so if you don't continue to grow, and I'll just give you a relationship over this, since 2016 to 2020, there's been an increase of about 340,000 people in Queensland. Of those, 312,000 have taken up residence in the southeast corner, and only 18,000 in the whole of regional Queensland. So it's running at 17 to 1. And what Cairns and Townsville and all those places need to realise, they need for the Richmonds, the Mareebas, the Hewingtons, Claremonts, the Emeralds to do well, so they in turn do well, and they grow themselves. Because if they don't grow, they're going to suffer the same fate as those smaller places with the withdrawal of service, because it comes down to economies of scale as far as the government's concerned. If you don't keep growing at a reasonable pace, government's got to take services off you. And the Port of Cairns is really something that they need to get a grip on. They need to get that and make sure it expands as much as possible, so it adds to the diversity of Cairns, because tourism ain't the vehicle, because you get smashed by an airline pilot strike, you get smashed by the Asian financial crisis, you get smashed by the GFC, now you get smashed by coronavirus. You have to have a diversified economy for any place these days if you want to survive. So that's the thing. Cairns needs to wake up and put their effort behind this road as well, because it's going to open up the peninsula, not just in agriculture, but minerals and everything else that goes with it. So it's important. Anyway, look, we've taken up a lot of your time tonight. If you just do this final one more round in regards to your friend here to stay in the regions.
Well, I'll kick off if you like. Look, I'm delighted to see these small papers bubbling up in the wake of News Limited's decision to pull out of the smaller centres. I think the future is bright for print media in the small towns. I commend those who are doing the hard work, and I urge you to remain proudly parochial.
Yeah, Max, I'd like to reiterate that too. And as the Vice President of the Queensland Country Press Association, I can tell you that in the last 12 months alone, our membership has doubled from 25 to 50, just in a short 12 months. And we have a further 12 to 15 publications that are waiting approval as well. So that just goes to show that, newspapers aren't really dead in Queensland at all. In fact, I think there have been more newspapers that have started up than what News Corp shut down. So at the end of the day, congratulations to those guys who have, decided to take their community on board, put across the news that they're willing to share to their community and keep it going. I mean, as I mentioned before, even those little, quarterfoils are doing a terrific little job within their organisations and communities as well. So the more of them we see, the better it is.
I just want to say, I think it's exciting times, actually. I think we're all, everybody's learned a lot along the way. I think it's possibly a time where it's a rejuvenation of it. I always feel most of these things as a silver lining. There's a reason why it went, which creates an opportunity for growth and little people like myself to grow up in it. And from what you're saying, Carl, there's also a lot of people with, motivated enthusiasm and want to see it and want to be involved in it. And I think this is just a reflection of the positivity that's going to happen. I think you look at newspapers now, I think they've been written off by the wrong people, because I think the people who are involved in it and are going to become more involved in it, I think they see it as a great opportunity. I mean, the fact that there's a lot of papers like yours, Carl, that survived in a long period of time, have got a proven business case of success, and other people are coming like myself to emulate those successes and learn. And we're going to find, I think, that a lot of people are taking that on board. We're going to provide a lot of information, Bill, and we're going to make a lot of impact on societies and communities and developments and making things better. I think that's our aim. So I'm really looking forward to it. I think we're all are.
Well, the thing I'm hoping for is the regions and publications like yourself and the growth of those things. Lets Brisbane know that there's more than the southeast corner that they're supposed to be looking after. But if they choose to continue to look after themselves and that, I'm sure we've got the people who can look after us and ourselves up here in the future.
Bill, I think the minister who just a short few months ago said that there were no local newspapers left in Queensland, got a shock when he found out there were actually 30 new ones that actually opened up. I don't think he actually had any idea as to how many newspapers there actually were in Queensland.
I'm pretty sure they haven't got much idea that there's people out beyond the southeast corner anyway.
Yes, indeed.
And industries.
Bill.
And maybe we would have got to beat the drum and tell them and let them know.
Yeah.
Okay, gentlemen, thanks very much. Just stay on the line for a minute and I'll just wrap up this show, and I'll talk to you a little in a minute.
Thanks very much.
Good evening, people. That's the end of episode 17. Stay tuned to the Regional Rap Facebook page for the announcement on episode 18. We'll probably have a little break for a week before we come back. But if you like the show, please like, follow, and subscribe. And on YouTube, please subscribe. Again, thanks very much for your being an audience, and we'll see you again soon.